Pokrovsk is being surrounded by the Russians. The Russians have been losing more than 1,000 troops a day. Why have the Russians got this so wrong? So, why Pokrovsk and where is it? Well, Pokrovsk is in the east, in the center of the map that we have here. The red areas are the areas that Russia has captured very slowly over the past years. The area with Donetsk and further to this side are the areas that Russia had already controlled. And of course, we've got Russia further off the map this way. In white, we've got the uncaptured parts of Ukraine with the significant cities of Zaporizhia and Dnipro. And of significance here, in the yellow colour, this is an area that Russia had captured during their initial advances into Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have taken back. Pokrovsk has been described as strategically significant due to its role as a supply hub. It stands at the intersection of multiple supply highways, one of which leads towards key inward cities in the Donetsk Oblast, including Chasiv Yar, Kostanavyeska, and houses a regionally significant railway station. The campaign for Pokrovsk was originally launched in spring 2024. So why have the Russians got this so wrong? And why are the Ukrainians holding on for such a long period of time? Well, it comes down to the tactics that are used, and that's what we're going to expose. Looking here, we've got a Russian vehicle-borne attack across open territory in the Pokrovsk battle, and we can see the explosions around the vehicles, but we can also see the vehicles being observed clearly from the drones that are dominating the airspace. We can see the drones attacking into the vehicles, but being supported by artillery fire as well. And it's the devastation of the drones from what they can see and the way they can intercept vehicles, because the Russians do not have control of the airspace. So drones are the new weapon of war that we're seeing in the front line, and they're having a significant effect. They're changing the tactics. And if we look at what the Ukrainians are doing, they're forcing the Russians to concentrate their troops into buildings. They're quite happy they go into buildings. They're attacking those buildings with incendiary devices dropped from drones, and then following that through with explosives dropped from drones, because they know that they can take out a number of Russians at once. In the Battle of Pokrovsk in the east, the Russians have been losing more than 1,000 troops a day, dead or wounded. That's 1,000 less per day available for the Russian commanders to carry on this fight. So why Pokrovsk? Well, let's go back to Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Russia wanted to collapse the government in Kyiv. It captured and put a lot of effort into getting the territories that we can see here in yellow, and in the northeast, and in the south of Ukraine. It failed to do that. Russia was pushed out of Kyiv by the Ukrainian defenders. It didn't collapse the Zelensky government, and Russia was forced to change its main effort, and it changed its main effort to the east. Why the east? It wanted to do two things. It wanted to create a land bridge from Crimea up through the eastern disputed Donbas territories and into Russia. And it wanted then to link out across the Black Sea port of Odessa and link up to Transnistria, which is a breakaway part of Moldova, but is Russian controlled, so that they could then control that whole southern and eastern part of Ukraine, and in particular, access to the Black Sea. Ukraine's defences pushed the Russians back into this position, which is why Russia is now focusing and describes its main effort as capturing the whole of the Donbas. That is why the battle for Pokrovsk is becoming the critical battle today. And we can see that Pokrovsk is being surrounded by the Russians as they move into what the Russians describe as, doctrinally, a cauldron effect. The main towns where activity is going on is Lysivka, where the Russians are assaulting and entrenching in the ruins. The risk of losing this village, currently in Ukrainian hands, is high. Kotlina, the enemy have been pushed back, but are targeting key rail and highway routes to try and isolate the city of Pokrovsk. Pershi Travina attempts to break through towards Pokrovsk's mining districts from the southwest as the Russians kick in. What the Russians are trying to do here is to close in on Pokrovsk from the two sides of the cauldron to try and enclose the city with, first of all, indirect fire, able to fire in and stop the Ukrainians from being able to resupply their troops. The second thing is, if they can close this in even further, is to get direct fire weapons, so tank guns, small arms fire, to interdict that. That means it is virtually impossible then for the Ukrainians to resupply their troops. If they can't get ammunition, they can't fight, to give them their food, to get casualties out, and to support them. That is when the retention of Pokrovsk from a Ukrainian perspective becomes untenable, and the Ukrainian commanders need to make a decision to withdraw. Now, withdrawal itself does not necessarily mean a loss on the battlefield, because Ukraine is carrying out a tactic of trading space for time. Remember, this has been going on since April 2024, and that time they're using to influence the Russians at different levels in the battle space. And we'll look at this next. So what do I mean by these different levels that Ukraine is trying to influence this war? Warfare is not all about what's going on the front line, no matter what commentators are saying. It is fought at different levels. The front line that we've seen around Pokrovsk is the tactical levels. That's where the battles are going on. That's where the close engagements are happening. But to support that front line, it needs a lot of activity at what's called the operational level. That's where your campaign plans are put together. That's where your support for the front line is critically important. And this is where the Ukrainians are attacking with their long-range drones, with their special operations executive type tactics to stop Russia's ability to try and reinforce what's going on at the tactical level. And of course, all of this is setting the conditions for what's happening at the strategic level. And if the strategic level doesn't work, the operational level doesn't work, then the tactical battle is going to be short. And that strategic bit is President Zelensky convincing Western countries to continue to supply Ukraine with arms, ammunition, and finances. That strategic bit is influencing Vladimir Putin's decision-making and the push to try and get peace deals and peace agreements. If that strategic bit doesn't fall into place, then there's only so long the operational bit can continue. And when that falls apart, the tactical piece will fall apart itself. They are all interlinked. President Zelensky and his commanders have recognized and have said that they cannot win the tactical battle to push the Russians out of Ukraine. And therefore, they're fighting at this operational level, the SOE tactics, the oil refineries being bombed, the airfields being interdicted by Ukrainian drones, factories catching fire, logistic hubs, rail stations catching fire or being blown up. And that in itself is influencing Vladimir Putin's decision-making at the strategic level as influence comes in from politicians across the world. One of the things that is influencing all of these levels is a change in tactics. And one of the key tactics that's changed from all sides is the use of drones. We see them used at the operational level to influence strategic thinking, attacking Russian oil refineries. That affects the Russian economy. That's a strategic implication. Attacking at the operational level into Russian logistic hubs and rail hubs, that's affecting their ability to support their tactical operations. But let's see how these drones are blurring the front lines today. Every blade of grass is under surveillance. There are now enormous killing zones. The front line is no longer 50 to 250 yards, direct fire weapon range. It is over these tens of kilometers. Drones are able to fly deep behind enemy lines, crippling supplies. This is paralyzing front lines as we knew it, changing tactics. Smaller waves of troops are harder to spot. That is why we're seeing the Russians starting to move into sabotage groups. 3, 4, 6, sometimes 1 or 2 people. Now, the different types of drones that are out there, if we look into the pictures, we have the reconnaissance drones. We have what are almost traditional armed longer range drones carrying weapons on them. Fixed wing in the look. But what we're seeing now is the use of FPV drones, giving pictures directly back into command bunkers so commanders can see what is going on the ground. The FPV drones flown by soldiers with these goggles on, covering their eyes, being able to see in 4K everything that is happening in front of them. And what is it that they're doing? They're flying with larger drones with conventional munitions underneath them that they drop onto armoured vehicles, soft-skin vehicles, or individuals. Drones are being used as snipers against individuals. They're being used as snipers against aircraft. Drones are being used as suicide drones, where a conventional munition, this is from an RPG anti-tank round, is being strapped to a sacrificial drone and flown into a vehicle or flown into a person. And what the technology change there has been is, in the early days, a lot of these drones were controlled by radio control. That radio control is being intercepted, being interdicted, and being blocked by electronic warfare. So the next move is to wire control, fiber optic control, and the drones are carrying fiber optic spools that will allow this very thin cable to spool out behind it so that the direct control has no radio signature whatsoever. These fiber optics can go over tens of kilometers, allowing the drones to be flown forward, put into ambush positions in the ground, and then when vehicles or something else comes close, they take off and attack those vehicles. Very difficult to deal with, and that is the greatest threat around Pokrovsk and across the whole of the front line today. So, and finally, we've seen lots of clips of Russian tanks being hit by NLAW and Javelin missiles supplied by the West. But why are they so prone to exploding? And it's not just from anti-tank missiles that are designed that way. Here we have a drone dropping a grenade in through the driver's hatch of a T-72 tank. The grenade explodes and the tank very quickly catches fire. And that fire turns into a huge explosive event, or turret tossing, as people refer to it as. So why do they explode? They explode because these things, the shells and the charges that are used to fire the shells, are held in the turret of the tank. There's an autoloader in here. There's a crew of 3, and that autoloader has everything that is flammable or explosive sitting just underneath the turret ring. So whenever a grenade is dropped into the tank, that acts as the initiator for everything else in the tank to go off. It's a design flaw. So the vulnerability of the Russian tanks, the old Soviet design of tanks, is why it's very unusual for us to see armoured push going forward into Pokrovsk and across the rest of the front line, because drones are controlling everything that is going on, and dropping a grenade which costs a few $100s at most into a tank that costs millions of dollars is not a good use of Russian defense money. The drones, small explosives, and changes in tactics are controlling and changing the way frontline tactics are fought.